I've told you this. We've talked a little bit in our time together, but my father was an abusive guy. My mom was very emotionally unstable. She was institutionalized for a while. I lived alone for a large part of my childhood. Didn't care much for Christianity. Didn't think Christian people really cared what was going on in my world. But when I became a believer at age 17, I finally decided, found that my attitude toward God, it was not his fault. I set two standards for myself that I wanted. And I asked God to do two things in my life. I said that I wanted to be a good husband and be remembered by my wife, as again, I had not met anyone at that point to have a wife. And I wanted my children to think they had had a good and godly father. And both of those decisions were based on the character that I saw that God wanted me to have, that the success in life I was going to have were the impact I had as a husband and a father first, and everything else would follow that. And that is a Christian husband and a father first. So it became a choice of character that changed everything for me. How would I live consistent with what God wanted me to be?
And yeah, you keep going back to it's about character. And I mean, if we look at the judgment seat of Christ, we don't stand before him and he's asking, what job did you do? How many kids did you have? Blah, blah, blah. How pretty of the wife did you get? Or whatever. What he's asking is...
I nailed that one, but that's...
Well, I'm glad you said that.
Whether it's a standard or not, that just matters.
But you get to the judgment seat of God, and he asked, what did you do with what I gave you? What was your character? Who were you as a child of God? And it's the bema seat. Your bad actions will be burned away, and only what's done for Christ will last.
Yeah. I wanted my children to see me as a good and godly man that cared about them and raised them in the right way to understand that. I wanted my wife to see me in that capacity. And that is what I carried to whatever job came up. And it turned out to be an engineering career that I had never planned on, never trained for, and spent 45 years, literally over 100 awards for design things that I had never expected to have a part of that. And also a career 45 years in one of the most hostile anti-Christian settings you can have.
Northridge was not a
friendly
Christian
place.
School.
No, in fact, I wound up being a person that had to speak at a trial. I was a witness to a trial where a Christian was actually fired for his work there, and specifically for his faith, for being a Christian. They tried to hide it another way, but it didn't turn out that way. And they got nailed for that, and deservedly so, and not because I wanted to see that. But when I took to that, again, you hear people talk about this. You do all things as unto the Lord, right? Ephesians talks about it in the chapter 6 there, that Paul goes through that whole thing about slaves, serve your masters, which is an interesting passage when you get to it, because it certainly isn't one that people like in our culture, the whole idea, what do you mean, a slave? And what Paul is laying out is God is far more concerned than the character you show than the conditions you have to put up with. That your role is to live a godly character regardless of the circumstances you have to put up with. And it isn't because God doesn't care about slavery. You can go into Exodus 21 and it says a man stealer shall be put to death, and anyone that buys from him. God hated slavery. Chattel slavery was condemned unceremoniously in Scripture. The slaver and the buyer with the death penalty. But he's saying, if that's the condition you're in, what I'm more concerned with, are you showing a godly character? Are you impacting this world because of how you view your relationship to me? Or are you gearing your whole life based on how you view your relationship to what you have to put up with? And for most of us, for most people in this world, the whole thing is, what is happening to me is the most important thing, not am I serving God properly? And that distinction is a God worldview that impacts things. But here's the excellence that I talk about when you bring it to work. Yes, we should try to be the greatest employee we can be, but the simple fact is, we're not always better than anybody else.
No.
I don't care who you are. You're not the best at everything you do. Now, we're striving, because we're trying to serve God, to do the absolute best job we can. But the test is not if I'm the best employee who's ever lived in this job. The test is, did I have the best character I could have for God while doing that job? And that's the beginning point. And I have found that success on the other side, excelling in the performance, stems from excelling in the character. demonstrating who God is in your life. That my greatest responsibility in doing a job is showing God's character in doing that job. And this is also important because I've had some Christians talk, I got in trouble at work and it was because I got persecuted because I was standing for God. And then you talk, what do you mean? What do you mean by standing for God? Well, I was sharing the gospel with these guys and then I got in trouble for it. What were you supposed to be doing at the time you got in trouble for sharing the gospel? Well, what do you mean? Did you have a job that you were supposed to be completing? Did you have a responsibility that you were supposed to be serving? Did you take time off from your commitment to perform these duties to do that? Or was this on your own time? Now, if it's on your own time, let's talk about this. But if you were on the clock and you were doing this because I want to share the gospel of Christ, when you had said, I'm on the clock and I'm going to perform this task, that's not character.
You, in a sense, made an oath with your employer that this is what I'm going to do, and you broke that.
You broke it out.
Which is the opposite of being a testimony.
That's dishonoring to God, and now I have a hard time thinking that God is seeing outrage at what's happened to you. He's looking at you and say, why did you embarrass me like that?
Mm-hmm.
Your testimony is supposed to flow from, first, doing what was right for your commitment and showing that character, and then those opportunities arose. Now, I worked at a place where keeping a Bible out like this was considered bad. Someone could complain for creating a hostile work environment for having
and all that.
You couldn't do that. But what I found in displaying character and building up a credibility, because these people hated my Christianity, but found that over the course of time, when I served them well, when I strove for excellence, when they got a product that they wanted on time, when they got an attitude that was always positive, even when they were abusive to the tone, it changed their discussion and their attitude toward me. And they became open to talking about the gospel. And before and after work and on my lunchtime and when I had opportunity, suddenly there was discussion, not because I compelled them, because they wanted to know, why are you different this way? What's going on? How can you know how we say, well, how do you view that? And I had conversations all the time. Professors, you're going to find, people always think these are the most intelligent people. They're very intelligent in their field. But that doesn't mean they're intelligent across all the fields. There's things they don't understand, and they had questions too, just like anyone else. And the opportunities to do that, it changed things. It changed the dynamics of how I lived and how things worked out for me. Unlike some people that I mentioned, I've known Christians that have gotten in trouble at work. There was a guy before I became the supervisor that came in and took over the job. He was a drunk and a thief, and he was problematic. And when I reported him, he immediately slandered me, said it was because I had wanted the job and I was trying to undermine him, and he made it very believable. And it went on for a long time. They didn't know what to do, what to think about this.
Who to trust.
Who to trust. Who's really telling the truth here? Because maybe Myron really did want that job so bad, and eventually I wound up with it. But they brought in an overseer to look at the situation and try to sort it out. And he came in one day, and here's a standard I set for myself. When I first started that job, I was the first guy in and the last guy to leave. And that's before I was the supervisor. Mm-hmm. That's just, I wanted to set a standard that said, you're going to see excellence from me in my, because I found, again, I couldn't be better than anybody else, but I could work harder than anybody else. I could compel myself to do that and show an attitude. And the guy showed up, and I was there in the shop working, because he tried to show up before anybody got there.
I was
already there working. And he sat there and watched me for a while, and then 10 minutes after the clock had said the day was supposed to start, the supervisor came in. Late, and started his day. And it took about 6 months, but eventually that guy was gone for the theft and the drinking and all the things he did, and I was in charge of the shop. And he stopped me and said, I knew day one who was right and who was wrong in this situation. I said, how could you know that? And he goes, I came in and you were in the shop working. He said, that told me right away where the character lay, who had the character to trust. Our testimony is based on a worldview that says we have a God that deserves the right kind of attitude. Now, I wish I could say in all 45 years I always had those stellar moments and never had a single mistake where somebody could look at me and say, that was, unfortunately, no. But I do think that on the whole, that I established something that made a difference because of that worldview. What matters? And what mattered was the character that displayed the character of God in any situation in whatever I did. And that character had to flow out in the quality of my work. I remember one professor, I worked with him, he'd been there somewhere 25, 30 years, and he made a comment. He goes, every year, the work that comes out of that shop's a little bit better. And he goes, that I've noticed that since you showed up. And yeah, again, I was striving for excellence. Because it wasn't just him I was serving, it was Jesus Christ. And I always wanted Jesus to get a little better every time, just as my character tried to get better, my growth in God tried to get better. I wanted that as well, to reflect that same worldview, that God should be honored. That any time that came up, that should be honored. Mm-hmm. So I think people miss that in what matters, that our worldview starts with what character does God want me to live out? And that comes from our understanding of God. And if we have a God that is big, that he is right and pure, if everything he says is true, if I can open this and trust that every one of these is God-breathed, every word of this is absolutely true in every aspect, and live on it, that changes things. And also because I trust that every day that God still loves me and that I am in his hand and in his protection. And I'm not working any day to try to reestablish that. I'm just living it out. You've had any other questions?
Yep. Well, I think what we're seeing is it's not about just what you say or what you say you live out. It's living it out. And sometimes coming into work early, being the last one to leave, is all the testimony someone needs to see, yeah, that's what following Jesus means.
Small things make a difference if they're consistently done. And especially when there's nothing to be gained by it. Mm-hmm. Now, when the Christian gentleman that had retired that left that job open, and yes, I did apply for it, but I was a very young man at that time.
Yeah. And
they brought in this guy that had this background. It turned out to be a problem. And yeah, they could have thought, well, he did it leading up to that to give it a chance for the job. But to do that after you didn't get it.
Even after you didn't get it,
to do that after he's now slandering me and trying to get me fired, and to continue to come in early and leave late. When, I'll give you an example. I was a state employee, and I'll be very honest with your audience. State employees, unfortunately, have earned their reputation by and large. Not all of them, but and part of it is because the state has created an atmosphere where excellence, there's really no reward for it.
You're going to get the job, and you're going to keep the job, and you're going to get paid no matter what.
Basically, as long as you're not caught standing over the body with a smoking gun, you're not going to get fired. You have to really do something massively stupid to get yourself fired. And as long as you do a bare minimum of work, you'll get the same pay as the guy who's just breaking his tail off, working like crazy out there. And so it is hard to build up a lot of enthusiasm to do an excellent job because it's not going to change anything. There's no merit to that except for the Christian who sees that I'm doing this in a loving relationship with God and not for the record on the job. But again, I have found that doing it that way has often led to a reward on the other side because that character, that work ethic does make a difference. It changes how the world views you, and it gets to the point that even your worst enemies, even the people that hate your Christianity more than they can possibly imagine, can't help.
They have to respect you.
They have to respect the character you show.
Mm-hmm.
Now, sometimes they respect you to the point they hate you even worse. It's killing them. They want to find a problem in you. They want to find justification for their dislike of your faith, and they can't find it. And that can tick some. But most others, it softens to a point. Mm. And they are willing to listen and talk about some things that are amazing. I was working there when the state or the nation changed the marriage rules. And now it was no longer between a man and a woman. And one of the professors, we were at that was a retirement party of all things for a gentleman. I was there, he'd been, and we were talking. And a couple of professors came and sat on either side of me and said, well, you must be really ticked off about this. I said, what is it? Why do you hate gay people so badly? And I didn't say I hated anybody. I said I believe that God defined, and they were just going at me, hammers and tongs. Another professor came over and goes, you have no business treating him like that. He has never once shown you the disrespect you're showing. And this guy had the same exact views as the other two.
Disliked you just as much.
Disliked my views just as much. But he stopped the thing, saying he would never treat you with this disrespect, and you both know it. And I'm stunned. And the two guys look at him and go, "You're absolutely right." And both of them stood up and apologized in the public setting right there and then.
Wow.
And again, it took years in that setting to build that kind of credibility, to build that kind of stature in terms of how people viewed my character. But it all paid off just because of how I viewed God, that God deserved this level of devotion, this level of effort in everything that I did. And that changed all the things around it. Again, going back to that thing, it troubles me that even as Christians, we're far more concerned with preparing our kids to be successes athletically, financially, but not character-wise. It's astounding how little effort we want to put. I've always had a great respect.
Central.
Yeah, I've always had a great respect for your parents because they consciously make choices about this is what our children need to know. They have a coming of age ceremony. When they see that character shown out, they reinforce it. But very few parents purpose to build that, and very few churches purpose to talk about that. If our sermons are not rolling into the idea of this is what you do with what you just found, this is what should change in you, we are not preparing our people for the world.
Mm-hmm.
We know that the early church was devoted to the apostles' teaching, to prayer, to the breaking of bread, and to fellowship. And then they were scattered. And James could have gone again to go and say, here's the doctrinal things you can't afford to forget now that you've been scattered by this persecution.
But instead he says, here's how you need to live.
This is what you need to be. Now, it isn't because the teaching was not important, but he wanted them to do an evaluation of the character. What is motivating you? We can get back to the doctrine, and it's certainly they had to reestablish it, and the teaching was important. I'm not saying that he dismissed that it's all about how you felt about God and nothing about what was true. No, he was talking to a group of people who had been sitting under the apostles' doctrine, sitting under his teaching. And he knew they understood the doctrine, but he wanted you to understand the character that's supposed to flow out of that. Don't lose sight of that. You're being persecuted, you're angry, you're feeling everything is unfair. You're at that moment in life where you're going, I've done nothing wrong.
Why is this all hitting me?
Why me? And which of us hasn't been at that point where we're going, I didn't do anything to deserve this? And he's going, that's not the point. And he comes back to that, and I'm sure, and we see the great books of doctrine from Romans and Ephesians and tremendous things, but the starting point for James talking to a group of Christians who had been trained by the apostles and trained well was, do you understand the character that should be flowing out of this new reality in your relationship to God?
Yeah. So I hope what you're seeing here, guys, is that what matters, and one of the central aspects to a biblical worldview, it's not just knowledge, it's not just knowing stuff, but it's what you do with it. It's what you go out, step out into secular jobs, into your families, into your lives, and do with what you know to be true. Character matters. So we thank you guys for watching the Faith Tube podcast once again, and we'll see you next time. God bless.